I am sure that many of you have heard of the superhero whose name is Spider-Man. Maybe you've seen some of the Spider-Man movies or watched Spider-Man cartoons on Saturday mornings, or maybe you've even read a Spider-Man comic book. But I need to tell you that our superhero Spider-Man is actually much older than you may think. He's actually over 350 years old. That's right. Spider-Man originally came from Western Africa, and there are many stories that have been told about him down through the years. In the old days, they didn't call him Spider-Man. His name was Anansi. And Anansi still had superpowers, although not the ones that we're used to with our Spider-Man. He didn't wear a spandex suit or scale tall buildings in the city. No, instead, he could change himself into anything that he wanted. He was a shapeshifter. And the Spider-Man of old had superpowers. They were his wit and his intelligence. Now, Spider-Man was a skinny old man in most of these old stories about him. A skinny old man with a long gray beard that hung down on his round belly. And most people didn't suspect that he had superpowers. Now, I want to tell you one of the very first stories that have ever been told about the superhero Spider-Man, or Anansi. Once, all you people gathered here, there were no stories to be heard on the earth. All the stories that had ever been told had been captured by the sky god, Naomi. And he placed all of those stories into a golden box and shut them up tight and put that golden box underneath his throne where no one could ever touch it. Now, the skinny little Spider-Man, Anansi, heard about that golden box of stories, and he wanted to go up and buy them from the sky god. And so one day, he turned himself into a spider, and he wove a web that went all the way up to the sky. And when he arrived, he turned himself back into a skinny old man and approached the sky god, Naomi. He bowed in front of Naomi and said, "Oh, Naomi, I have come to buy the stories that you keep in your golden box." And when Naomi heard what the little Spider-Man wanted, well, he started laughing at him. Oh, Anansi, you are so small and weak, so small and weak. You'll never be able to pay the price that I'm asking for my box of stories. For the only way you can have them is if you bring me Asibo, the leopard with the terrible teeth. And then you must bring me Mamburo, the hornets who sting you like fire. And then you must bring me Momoatia, the tiny dancing fairy lady. Anansi heard the price for the box of stories, and he simply bowed again in front of the sky god and said that he would be happy to pay that price if he could have that box of stories. And when Naomi heard this, he just started laughing again. Oh, Anansi, you are so weak and small, so weak and small. How are you ever going to do that? But Anansi didn't say a word. He just bowed one last time in front of the sky god, and he climbed back down the web that he had made, back down to the earth, and started to look for the things that the sky god had asked for. Now, the first thing that Anansi did was to run along the jungle trail. And he ran and he ran and he ran until up ahead he saw Asibo, the leopard with the terrible teeth. And when Asibo saw the Spider-Man coming, he said, "Ho ho, Anansi, you are just in time to be my lunch." Anansi said, "Oh, Asibo, let's wait a minute. Let's you and I talk. Why don't we play a game together first before you make lunch out of me? You see, Anansi knew that the leopard loved to play games. And when he heard the word games, why, his ears perked up and he said, "What do you want to play?" Anansi said, "Oh, I have a new game, leopard. We're going to play the binding game together." The leopard said, "How do you play?" Anansi said, "Oh, I will take a vine out of the jungle and you will lay down on your back and I'll tie you by your front feet and your back feet. And then it'll be your turn to tie me up. We'll see who can do this the quickest. And that will be the winner." The leopard thought this was a wonderful game because when it was his turn to tie up the skinny little Spider-Man, he was going to tie him up tight and pop him into his mouth and eat him for lunch. The leopard was so excited to try this new game that he laid down on his back and put his feet in the air. Anansi went over and got a vine out of the jungle and he tied the leopard by his front feet. And then he tied that leopard by his back feet. And then he put all of his feet together and tied them tight. Anansi took the end of that vine and threw it over the branch of a tree and hauled that leopard up. So he was hanging upside down in the tree. Anansi said, "Asibo, leopard with the terrible teeth, you look like you're ready to meet the sky god, and I'll come back for you." Now, the next thing that Anansi did was to take a hollow calabash, a gourd, and then he took a great big long knife and cut one leaf off of a banana tree. He put that banana leaf on his head and it looked like a banana umbrella. And he took that gourd and he filled it all the way to the top with water. And then with that banana leaf on his head, Anansi started to creep through the tall jungle grasses. He crept and he crept. He crept and he crept until he came into a great big clearing in a field. And there in the middle of that field was a nest. And inside of that nest was Mamburo, the hornets who sting you like fire. This is what he did. He kept that banana leaf on his head. He took some of the water in that gourd and he sprinkled some of the water onto the banana leaf so it was running off of the edge of that leaf. And then he took the rest of the water in that gourd and he poured it on the hornet's nest. Now you could hear them inside and they were angry. But before they had a chance to fly out and sting Anansi, he said, "Hornets, it's raining out here. Why don't you all fly into my gourd and there your wings will be safe from the rain." And instead of coming out and stinging Anansi, all those hornets flew into his gourd. And when the last one had flown in, he put a stopper on that gourd. He tied a vine around it. He threw the end of that vine over the branch of a tree and he hauled those hornets up into that tree and left them hanging there. Before he left, he said, "Mamburo, you look like you're ready to meet the sky god. I'll come back for you." Now, the last thing that Anansi did was to take a very small and sharp carving knife. And he got a piece of wood out of the jungle and Anansi started to carve. And he was really good at it. And when he was done carving out of that piece of wood, why, he had carved a tiny little wooden doll that looked just like Momoatia, the tiny dancing fairy lady. Now he took that wooden doll that he had carved and put it at the base of a tree where he knew that Momoatia liked to dance at night. He put a great big bowl of sweet potatoes in her lap. And then he covered that doll from her head to her feet with sticky latex from the trees, just like our super glue. The last thing he did was to tie a vine around her sticky head. And Anansi took the other end of that vine and he went and he hid in the jungle and he waited. When night fell and the moon rose, from out of the jungle came Momoatia, the tiny dancing fairy lady. And she danced all the way around that tree. A woohoo, woohoo, woohoo. She didn't notice the doll at first, but then she came around the tree again, and in the moonlight, she saw the doll, and she thought it was real. She saw that the doll was holding a bowl full of sweet potatoes, and Momoatia, well, she was hungry after all that dancing. She went up to the doll and she said, "Gum baby, I'm awfully hungry. May I have some of your sweet potatoes?" Now, Anansi was hiding with the end of that vine in his hand, and he tugged on it. And when he did, that vine that was wrapped around the doll's head, well, it caused the doll's head to go like this. Momoatia thought that the doll was saying yes. So she scooped all the sweet potatoes up out of that bowl and she ate them one after another until she was good and full. And then she went back to the doll and she said, "Gum baby, thank you for those sweet potatoes. I feel much better now." But the doll just stared at her. She said, "Gum baby, I said thank you. Don't you have the proper answer for me?" The doll just stared at her. Momoatia said, "Gum baby, you either answer me in the proper way or I'm going to smack your face." The doll just stared at her. So she did it. Whack! And when she smacked the doll's sticky face, her hand got stuck to the doll. She said, "Gum baby, you let go of my hand or I'm going to smack you again." The doll just stared at her. So she smacked her again. Whack! Now both of her hands were stuck to the doll. Oh, poor Momoatia. She tried pulling her hands off of the doll. She tried pushing that doll off of her hands. She even got her feet up and tried to pry herself off, but her feet got stuck to the doll. That's when Anansi came out of his hiding place in the jungle with that vine in his hand. And he went over and looked down and said, "Momoatia, you're a little sticky, but you look like you're ready to meet the sky god." And he picked her up. She was still stuck to the doll. And he brought her back to the place where he had left the hornets hanging in the trees. And he cut those hornets down. And then he took them both back to the place where he had left that leopard hanging upside down in another tree. And he cut him down. Anansi took his captives and he wove a web around all of them. And then he wove another web back up to the sky and he carried his captives behind him as he climbed and he climbed. When he got back up, he put all of them down in front of Naomi, the sky god, and he said, "Oh, Naomi, I am ready to pay the price for the stories in your box. For here is Asibo, leopard with the terrible teeth. And here is Mamburo, the hornets who sting you like fire. And here is Momoatia, the tiny dancing fairy lady. No one's ever been able to capture her at night while she was dancing." Naomi could not believe his eyes. He could not believe what the little Spider-Man had done. And he stood up and took that box of stories out from underneath his throne, and he handed the stories to Anansi, and he announced to all that the little Spider-Man Anansi had paid his price for the box of stories, and from that day forward, all the stories would belong to Anansi. Anansi wrapped his arms around that box of stories, and he climbed back down the web to the earth, and he took that box of stories home to his village. Now all of his people crowded around, for they wanted to see what Anansi had in the golden box. And when he slowly opened the lid, all the stories that had been inside of that box for so long, why they started to leap up and they started to fly away. Now, some of the stories were adventures, and some of the stories that came out of that box were happy stories. Some were humorous, and other stories were sad. But all those stories drifted off and flew away. Now, some of Anansi's people ran after a few of those stories and they grabbed them and they brought them back home. Even Anansi reached up and grabbed some of those stories before they got away, and those became his spider stories. But the rest of the stories that had been in that box, why they drifted off and flew away until they landed in all the places of the world. So it doesn't matter where you travel to one day. When you get to that new place and you meet the people who live there, I am sure that they are going to have a wonderful story to share with you. And I hope after you listen to their story, you share one of your own with them. In Western Africa, where the superhero Spider-Man really came from, they always say, a story, let it come and let it go. And just like the stories out of the box, we have done that. So now it's done and the story is over.